We are good to go. Well, I am super, super happy to be here, and I'm super happy to get to speak 3 times here in Marshall. I was invited originally to be part of the Cultures in the Prairie to do their keynote for today there, and then they learned about a simulation that I do called the Killing Fields. Now, my family were Cambodian refugees who survived the killing fields and immigrated to Rochester, Minnesota back in 1982. So eventually, as we got to second and third generation Cambodian immigrants here in the United States, I was teaching 4th grade at the time, and then I realized that my students now were quite disconnected from the stories. And yeah, it's a hard story to keep going. It's a hard story to tell because for the refugees themselves who went through the genocide that took place under Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge at that time, and this was during the time of the Vietnam War, telling it relives a lot of the trauma that they went through and the difficulties that they went through. So a lot of times when questions get asked by the kids, they would just push them away and say, you know, you don't need to know about that. So then eventually the stories of struggles and the heroic stories also of that time gets lost. So what I did was actually I went out to interviewed killing field survivors and their stories and also their stories of their families and friends there. I got the idea from the Holocaust Museum when I visited there early, before that time. This was around 2011 or so. And then created that into a story and then had participants play roles of killing field survivors and people in their families so that they can experience the situation firsthand, just to keep that story going and honor, my parents, my grandparents' lived experiences as well. So that was what happened last year. Yesterday. It was a 3-hour long emotional roller coaster for the participants and myself as the presenter as well. So if you're ever interested in experiencing that in the future, I'll come back out to Marshall again and do it just for you. But so what I'm going to talk about today here is the exact same speech that I'm going to give to the Cultures on the Prairies this afternoon here. But before I do that, can I just go around the room and maybe have some introductions here? Maybe just quickly name and how long you've lived in the Marshall area here.
I'm Joan Sorensen, and we've lived here 40 years.
Okay.
And I came with her.
Okay.
I'm Ray.
Good. Nice to meet you too. Yep.
I have lived here for 14 years, and I have followed my husband from job to job. That's why we came to this town, because he got an offer to work.
Okay.
So I'm a tag-along.
Okay. And your name? And your name?
Oh, me, I'm Lavon Drogemuller.
Nice to meet you, Lamont.
Hi, I'm Fran Andrzejewski, and I've been here longer than dirt.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
I'm David. We've been here since 2003.
Okay.
Jen, probably good 50-some years.
Okay.
Yeah, mine been around 50-some years.
Okay.
Karen, forever.
Must be a great place to live here.
Darwin and Jean Leake, we immigrated from Iowa 50 years
Oh.
ago next week.
Okay. I would understand why you want to leave Iowa. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
I'm Carol Lindbergh, and I moved here in 2013 to be with my daughter and her husband, who was the manager of Shopko. And she insisted I retire close to her, so I've been here that long.
And I'm Joyce Greeley, and I came from the Canadian border of Little Fork in 1957.
Okay.
As a
Is it warmer down here?
Not most days.
Lynette Prairie, and I've been here since 1984.
Okay. All right. Nice to meet you.
Bonnie Davis, and I was born here in Marshall. I've been here forever.
Okay.
Leslie Moss. I was born in Green Valley. We lived on a farm north of Marshall, and in 2000 we moved to Marshall.
Okay, so all in the southwest corner here.
Yeah.
Nice to meet
Joe Newman, and I was born here, and I've lived here all the time.
you. Okay.
June Carter, and I've lived here all my life.
Okay.
Mary and Mary, we've been here 60 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Earl Waring, been here since 1960.
All right. All right. Nice to meet you all here. So I'll thank you for sharing a little bit of you. And this is myself here. So the screen here, this is from my school district here in Prior Lake, Savage Area Schools. I started out as a teacher about, oh gosh, this is I think starting my 19th year in education. 10 years of that as a teacher, and then 9 years as an administrator here, along the ESL program, working with immigrants and refugees in the school district area. Also responsible for other intervention programs too, for students who struggle with reading or math, and creating programs that supports them, oversee the summer school program. So all along the line of what can we do to help students succeed. And today you see pictures here. These are some of the refugees and immigrants that come to the Prior Lake Savage Area School District. A lot of misunderstanding is discussed when talk about Minnesota, about how not diverse we are, which could be not real, could be further from the truth, right? We know how diverse we are as a town in Marshall, all of the, many of the rural cities in southern Minnesota, and even for a community like Prior Lake here, we have 61 different languages in the school district, and one of the largest Russian-speaking population there. So for people who didn't know that Prior Lake had refugees, that has now been unearthed a little bit, and Prior Lake has really recognized the important role that they play in resettling refugees into Minnesota here. With having one of the largest Russian-speaking population, many of the Russian diaspora or Slavic people actually came from the Ukraine area. So now with the war going on over there, family sponsorships are happening, and new refugees are coming to our school district. Since last year, we resettled about 17 refugee students into our school district here. From the eastern side of Ukraine, so heavily, the first-hand witness of the war and destruction that's going on over there. So this is my family now. Here, I was just bragging about my son a little bit earlier. This is him over here. He's a multi-sport athlete, as you can see there. He currently dominates kindergarten basketball. He also speaks 5 languages. Yeah. So I, being, an ESL teacher, and then also administrating the ESL or supervising the ESL program, I kind of say I know how to teach and keep languages going. So I make sure to develop healthy speech communities for him. He speaks Cambodian to me at home, and when he goes into English, because that's a natural thing to do since we're immersed in English here, I just remind him to how do we say these things in Cambodian again, so he keeps that language going. We read to him in French at night, because I'm also a French speaker. I was a French major in college, and my grandpa, who was in Cambodia, served in the army. We were a French colony at one time. So he spoke French, and that's how I keep that going with him. He's immersed in English, so he doesn't have to be having a lot of direct instruction in there. And then my wife is Chinese. That's my picture of my wife over there. She's a pharmacist there, or she calls herself a kitty drug dealer because she's a pediatrics pharmacist there. So she speaks Chinese there, and he would practice Chinese with her, and then he would more so speak English with her, though, so we can keep that going. We enrolled him in a Chinese immersion preschool in Minnetonka, and we took the 40-minute drive over there before coming back our way for work, just because we want to keep that heritage language going as well. There. And now, for kindergarten, he's in a Spanish immersion, and he'll be there for 5 years here, picking up his 5th language. So that's him. My other kiddo over there is my little ferocious 12-pound Shih Tzu Pomeranian mix there. He runs the neighborhood. My son and him has a love-hate relationship, so as you can see there, sometimes I have to break one of them aside and counsel one of them there. But this is my family. We have a very, very good life, for sure. And you know, we have a lot of opportunities that we've been able to give my son. But it wasn't always the case. You know, my family and I came as refugees who survived the killing fields. This is a picture of myself here, and my mother, and then my uncles and aunts. And then a picture of me with my grandma holding me over there. And you notice what's missing is actually my father's picture. My father and my mother got separated during the war when she was 7 months pregnant with me. And actually I didn't know that he was alive until I was 5 years old. I didn't get to talk to him until I was 17 years old. And I didn't get to see him until I was married and took my wife to meet him at the age of 31. And there's a lot of complication, and my story is not unique. Many refugees go through this here just because of everything that went on during that time over there. My family and I are Buddhist, so as you can see over there, my grandma and my grandpa, there's a special tradition that when you embrace something new, something good, you would shave your hair to give thanks, as a resemblance of giving thanks. And I was the first person in my family that was born outside the killing fields. My full name actually means the richness of life. And it's not given lightly because my grandpa lost 3 kids in the war, and not knowing that if other of his children would survive. So to be able to progress beyond that war era, to have that opportunity to expand the family here was very important to them. So both my grandpa and my grandma shaved their hair off there, and that's resembling letting go of the old and wishing for good things as they grow new. And luckily it did grow back. So it worked out. But what I'm going to talk to you today, and this is the common theme and question that was done for the simulation there last night as well, is when does the journey of being a refugee end? When do you stop being a refugee? Many answers come about. Some would say never. Some would say that it's when you come from one country to the next. But really the journey of a refugee is the journey to rediscover home, whatever sense that may be. And you don't need any poetic definition of what home is. You can just open up the dictionary and you can see there that what the definition of home was is what something the refugee had lost. Being relaxed and comfortable. Being in education, I always use students as examples there. A lot of our students in Prior Lake, they have a schedule. They can wake up in the morning, expected to go to school, even though on Thursday my son tried to play sick and we caught him. They made him go to school. But then after school, they can know, okay, I'm going to go to a safe home, or I have scheduled sports, daycare, or anything like that. Well, being in a war-torn country, you don't have that. You don't have that harmony with your surroundings, being on familiar grounds, and knowing what to expect next. And a refugee's journey, and why refugees are running, is to get that stability back. Is to be able to live again instead of surviving. So the answer to this here is, when does the refugee journey end? Okay, and maybe I should do this at the end so that it doesn't stop my presentation all at once. But the answer to this, when does the refugee journey end, is that when they can rediscover home. Again, that sense of belonging again, that sense of being able to live again instead of surviving. So taking that definition into account, or that answer into account, you can see that just because some of the refugees make it to America here, it doesn't mean yet that their journey is over. If anything, it's just a new journey starting. I'm going to show you a series of pictures here. This is Cambodia before the war. And I am proud to say that this is Cambodia now. In fact, it's to the point where I have a program in Prior Lake where I take 5 teachers to do a service trip over spring break every year to Cambodia there, to experience this here and to experience other themes that could help them in their work in Prior Lake. What do you see in this picture? Just shout it out. What do you see? Joy. Smiles on the kids' faces. What else? Color. A lot of color. On the buildings, on the canoes, signs of culture, signs of sport. This is what living is. This is what living is not. And this is the scenes that were experienced in the killing fields. That joy is gone. And for the kids being able to expect and be excited for some things in the future, they're just worried about whether or not they can have food for the next day. Sadly, the Cambodian story is not unique. This is Somalia. And it seemed like overnight, this is what Somalia became. This is Bosnia. It can happen everywhere. Signs of beauty, signs of culture, signs of freedom. Overnight, the Bosnians were put in cages. This is our home here, right? This is what we enjoy. Even though the Vikings seem to lose every year, we still enjoy them. We still have hope. I want you to talk to each other here, with someone right next to you. How would you feel? What would you do? And who would you turn to if this home that you knew was destroyed or gone? How would you feel? What would you do? And who would you turn to? Go ahead, let's take a few minutes to have that discussion. So let's hear it. First of all, the first question, how would you feel? What feelings would you be going through if this were to happen?
Frightened.
Frightened. Scared.
It's hard to express how you might feel because you don't have any idea.
In a way, lost.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. And what would you do? How many of you would not know what to do? And who would you turn to? Who would you look for first to make sure that they were safe or okay?
Your spouse.
Your spouse?
Yeah.
Your
church.
family? The church community?
Your kids.
Your kids? And for many refugees, they did this exact same thing. But for some refugees, they would turn to their kids, and then they realize that they're not okay. They would turn to their spouse and see that that person is no longer there. They can't reach their community, or that safe place, as in the church and other places, are no longer safe. So the experience that they once knew to be the things that supported them is no longer in existence. And that's why people run. That's why people go to different places. It's not easy just to pick up everything from your home and leaving them. This is not going on a tour in Europe or anything like that. This is not knowing what's going to happen to you in the future. Going to this new place with a new language, not knowing whether or not you can find a job, not knowing whether or not the people there will like you. These are very, very difficult. Not knowing if you will make the right decisions. But many choose to go. And the reason for that is hope. Hoping that something would be better out there. Mainly not for you, but for the people you love. You know, my grandpa was the leader to bring our family out of Cambodia. And, back then, something that's not really known was that the Cambodian refugees and many of the other Southeast Asian refugees also did migrant work. It wasn't called migrant work at that time because the fishing industry wasn't considered part of migrant work. It was only the agriculture pieces that were there. But we would go to the East Coast to take advantage of the fishing industry that was out there. Many went to the Boston area. There, Lowell, Massachusetts was what got into the big collection of Cambodians. Some would go out west. Actually, more would go out west, but many started out west too, in Long Beach, California. And that's where the largest resettlement of Cambodian refugees were at. On one of those trips, I was 8 years old, and just old enough to ask a lot of annoying questions. I started noticing that every time we would take this road trip, my grandpa's face was really sad. To the point that it seemed like that he was just not in himself. He was spacing out and seeing other things or thinking about other things. And for me, every trip out there was exciting. You know, you see new areas, you get to stop at different places. You know, every meal was McDonald's, you know, so you can't go wrong as a kid when that stuff happens. But one day I turned to my grandpa and I asked him, you know, if you're so sad, why did you leave Cambodia in the first place? Why didn't you just go back? My grandpa looked at me and he told me that his life actually already ended in Cambodia with his friends, his parents who passed away there. The reason why he chose to come was that so that I would have an opportunity to live. And this was the hope that carried many refugees forward. It was not the hope for themselves, but the hope for what could be better for their children. So this is my family here that came to America. My grandpa there is pictured in the center, along with his wife in blue there to the left of him. The gentleman in the middle was actually his adopted son. Along the way, and this was explained during the killing field simulation, when parents step on landmines or lose their life, babies are left, you know, on the road without anyone to care for. So he is one of the person that he picked up along the way and brought over to the refugee camps with him and came over as his son. They adopted 2 more children on top of him in that exact same situation. And along with that, though, they lost 3 children of their own. I always say a refugee's life is like a broken puzzle. And sometimes even when you put it back together, there's still missing pieces. And those missing pieces often are more important than the pieces that are there. My grandpa actually was a freedom fighter ever since he was 18. He was part of the Royalist Army that fought against the French for independence, and then went into retirement, but then was drafted again to serve as a trainer for the capitalist army during the communist capitalist situation. And after years of fighting, he wasn't able to take care of his family. He ended up hurting one of his sons, who ended up passing away. We didn't know what that was back then, you know, but this is the things that he was doing with PTSD and post-traumatic stress. One of his other sons stepped on a landmine, and because he tried to save the other children and bring them to the refugee camps, he had to leave them behind, knowing that his son was going to die. So there were pieces of his puzzle that was taken away from him. But he had hope. He had hope that at least maybe some of the things that he was doing would lead to a better life for his children. So a piece of the puzzle was brought back. My mother is in the red there. And this was early on in our refugee resettlement in the United States. She had a hard time being with the family. Much of it was because she couldn't forgive herself. My grandpa's 3rd kid that died, my mother blamed herself for. Under the communist Khmer Rouge, everybody had a role, and the power was reversed. The young children was actually given a gun and were put to carry out tortures of their family. My mother was only 11 at the time at the start of the Khmer Rouge. And her responsibility was to feed the toddlers, to give rations to the toddlers there and train them to be good Khmer Rouge or communist soldiers in the future. Well, one day my grandpa was sick, and she would sneak rations out to help make him feel better. The result of that was her younger sister died of starvation. And for 4 years under the killing field, she couldn't cry about it. She couldn't acknowledge that it was even her sister, because you were either Comrade 1 or Comrade 2 or Comrade 3 there under that society. So she waited 4 years to cry about it. And ironically, that was what drove her to safety, to the refugee camps where she was able to reunite with her family. and not being able to cry for 4 years had made her cry for the rest of her life. I still catch her thinking about this situation. She still tells me she has dreams about it. She tried to explain that it wasn't her fault, that she was trying to do the right things without any good choices. And even though people forgave her or never blamed her in the first place, she had a hard time forgiving herself. So puzzles were taken away from her. But she had some hope, because she had me. And she hoped that I would be able to make her proud and help heal some of the missing pieces that are there in her life. This is me there now, about around 3 years old there with a little pot belly in the white t-shirt. And as I grew up and I went to school, and I'll share with this a little bit more in detail as we go on through the slides there, everything about school wasn't able to talk about or explain my story at all. The holidays that were celebrated were a little different. As people talk about going to the cabins up north, we barely had a home to stay in. The language was different. School was hard, both socially and academically. It wasn't just the language barrier. It was even the experience of going to school that was missing, not only for myself, but for my parents as well. However, when I tried to tell them about my struggles, my mother's number one response was, "You don't know about struggle. You don't know about hardship. You can eat in this country even when you're not hungry. You never had to watch someone you love die right in front of you." And she was right. Even though she was right, it didn't make me feel any better, though. What it made me feel was that when I went to school, I wasn't American. But then when I came home, I wasn't Cambodian enough. So pieces were missing from me. But what I had was opportunity. Something that my parents didn't have, growing up in a war-torn country. So as you can see here, these were the pieces that my family came with to the United States. This was the broken puzzle that we tried to put together. And at that time, even though we had an opportunity and we were stable and we had an opportunity to grow, we were still very much refugees. Now again, coming from the school background, what I talk to as an example is more so about school and about what we can do in school to help heal and mend and bring back those missing pieces that are there. And often, before we can start doing the right work to help our refugee students and our refugee community heal, we need to understand where our gaps are. And I wrote this out here as gaps between school and our immigrant students, but it really can be gaps in the community as well, and our community resources in terms of support for immigrant students. But through the lens of school here, one of the big things and the big gap that is there is that in school, we read to learn. Knowledge comes externally to us. We bring in new ideas and all that, and we grow from those new ideas. For many of our refugees and immigrant students, because they didn't have this opportunity to grow within literacy, because of the life and experiences they had there, knowledge is internal. It comes from within. It's through lived experiences mostly, and that's what they would use then to analyze the texts that are in front of them. The big difference, though, is that when those texts is so far removed, and there's such a big gap between what's being taught in the text and their lived experiences and their understandings that they have, that's when it's really hard for them to understand and embrace the materials that are there. So it's very important for teachers to be able to close that gap. And a strategy to be able to close that gap is really to work with students there and make sure that their lived experiences are honored as well. And bridging their lived experiences to the knowledge and the work that's being taught in school. For example, when we learn about some of the wars here in world history, World War I, World War II, be able to recognize and have students be able to speak about their experiences as well. And that will enrich not only the students themselves that we're talking about, but enrich the materials in class also. Hands-on experiences is very important too. When we talk about vegetations and science, and you know, some of the process with sunlight and all that stuff, I can't remember the terms anymore. I'm in education. It's really, really important then to give students that experience. Because maybe growing up in tents and the refugee camps do not allow for that experience to work in gardens or anything like that. So what real world hands-on experiences can we provide our students? Number 2 there is an old research on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And school, again, is built for students who already have and already know how to do school. They have some of the materials, have some of the resources to support them with their homework. Their parents had experience in the same education system that they have there, so they can build off that and go beyond. But for many of our students, that basic needs is not there. And oftentimes coming to school is a direct challenge to what they can do to support their families. Whether it's older students or even younger students, and their responsibility to watch other siblings or go to work to bring money into the family. And if we, as a school system and as a classroom, says that the only thing that matters is grades, the only thing that matters is you have to get this work done, and we can set up support for you to get this work done here, and not acknowledge that actually the barriers to get that work done may be other things outside of the school, and finding resources to support them, whether it's from the school itself or direct connections with the community. A lot of times we put students in a position to choose between school and home. And when that happens, school loses every time. So we have to make sure that we recognize our support, and the supports that we give, whether it's in school or any resources that we have here, it does not naturally challenge their responsibility to their families. And then a lot of times, school is built to represent the community, built to meet the needs of the community. But when new students come in that don't automatically fit within that community there, if the school doesn't adjust, more and more so, the students that are in that school will feel like they're marginalized, and that school is not a safe and welcoming place for them. And I talk a lot about school because this is my background here, but you can find that in the workforce, you can find that in our community settings, resources that we put on the communities, public library, the parks, and all that. A lot of these researches here and the gaps that are in these 3 areas here are found in other areas besides school as well. Before I go into this here, let's do a little turn and talk again. How many of you have had direct connections with immigrants and refugees in your community? How many of you had relationships with them, whether it's through the church, knowing a family, sponsoring a family? And talk to each other about what you hear from them as what their needs are, whether it's difficulties in adjustments or opportunities that they are seeking, or for the fortunate ones, have an opportunity to gain. Okay? So turn and talk a little bit again. Share a little bit. Does everybody here know someone that's an immigrant or a refugee? Oh, okay. Well, let's have a whole group discussion here. Why do you think that is? Because Marshall is a pretty diverse community, right? They have a lot of Somali refugees here. Koreans. Okay, so I heard they are sticking together as a community. All right.
Well, we probably are too.
Yeah. We have our community networks here as well too. Why is that? What gives us this comfort to stick together, and what may be giving them that comfort? Go ahead.
One of the problems I see is because of our age, that we have our own environment, i.e. this building.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have a lot of chances to blend in, with the refugees.
Mm-hmm.
we had some relations, my wife did some work in Thailand and things like that. But now, because she had cancer and a whole lot of it, so you get removed from it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to get acclimated back into it because of the limitations that you have because of your age and the, the feeling big, dumb, and happy.
Yeah. Well, okay. There are limitations for sure, right? And this is something that we talk about in the school district a lot too, as we're working with the kids, and not necessarily so with the parents. We actually create this generational gap there, where the kids' world opens up, while the parents' world eventually closes down. And this is another experience with my grandfather here. As my world was opening up, as I was able to bridge and embrace both cultures and find the best of it eventually in both cultures and communities, my grandfather's world closed down more and more. He had his family. Outside of his home, he couldn't connect very well with his neighbors or anything like that. With the language barrier, the cultural barrier, the weather, it was just hard. But eventually, when the kids grow up, I'm probably the last of his grandkids that speak Cambodian. The other grandkids can understand what they say, what he said, or what my grandma spoke about, but they never respond in Cambodian, which then creates a barrier for her. And then their generation and their kids probably will lose both the understanding and the speaking ability in Cambodian. So his world eventually closed down to the walls of his own room, where he didn't feel comfortable even leaving his house anymore because he couldn't even communicate with his own family anymore. Yeah. So there is that definitely the barrier there. And I was going to go, for our Somali community, there's the religious barrier as well, or the religious differences. I wouldn't call it a barrier. But for our Karen population, they embrace Christianity also. And the church is a big gathering place for our community here. What is the barrier with that in getting to know our Karen population?
The fact that they're all together.
Okay.
You've got the whole cohesive unit, so, and they're speaking the native languages, so I didn't feel like the outsider.
Yeah. And people want to be where they're comfortable, right? And you're unsure if you're invited in or you're intruding when you reach out as well. And I think my goal is then, as I speak to maybe the community center here, the college, if I speak to the school district also, is, well, what opportunities that we can create to kind of alleviate that discomfort so people can come together and share experiences. Because sharing is what the old term sharing is caring. I mean, sharing is really what brings us together. I often say that if you can't celebrate visible culture, the foods, the languages, some of the holiday traditions together, we will never be able to set ourselves up for deep level discussions where we get to know each other at a more intimate level. So there are opportunities there for our community to be able to make that happen. Even us learning about the refugee community here, and I would say this session is great because you're learning directly from a refugee yourself here. So we get that interaction, right? We get that ability to be able to share with each other. And hopefully you find this as useful as maybe picking up a book that you're getting knowledge from external. You're getting this intimate discussion with that here. But there are opportunities to integrate, because a lot of times if we don't integrate, we get the opposite, right? Either you get segregation or forced assimilation. And that is unhealthy for a community. You and I got to talk a little bit about the Faribault experience. So prior to being at Prior Lake, I was actually doing my same job there as the director of multilingual programs over in the Faribault School District. And I was called in to help build their ESL program there after they had 1,000 ESL students already. So we were catching up. And the Faribault Public School District now is actually 60% immigrants. But the community is only 20% people of color. So what happened was, because we didn't address this early on and we didn't create opportunities to integrate and share and learn from one another, we had segregation in the community. Communities lived in different pockets, different corners of the community, attended different schools, did different things, and mistrust was created instead of trust and companionship and friendship. So it is important actually to do this work early on. How can we create spaces for us to share food with each other, our heritage, our journey? We are the land of immigrants, right? You know, every one of us really, I truly believe, have a story of struggle. But oftentimes as we go through the generation, we focus more on our successes, and therefore the story of struggles get lost. So that leads us perfectly into this here. As we're trying to connect with our immigrant population and our refugee population, it's important to know what stages of acculturation they are at. And this is sociology research from Harry Catano there. They talk about acculturation is an effect that happens on an individual when two cultures come in contact with each other, creating changes on both cultures. Okay. And you have areas of acculturation. Now, words can be substituted for this. Low assimilation, low ethnic identity. This is the term that summarizes being lost. And a lot of times when students or people are lost, they develop what we call a third culture. That may either be healthy or unhealthy, but they're feeling like they're not fitting in anywhere we go. This is a dangerous area for our students to be in, for our communities to be in. This is what leads to oftentimes a resistance identity that can be very, very bad for the community and bad for the individual themselves. We want to be on the opposite corner there, high assimilation, high ethnic identity. This is when people feel comfortable, the refugees and immigrants themselves feel comfortable in both cultures. They can see the best value in both there and live the best of both worlds. Okay. And then this is actually the stage that I feel like I'm in now just because of the opportunities that I've had. I mean, and honestly, I celebrate New Year's 3 times. You know, January 1st, the Lunar New Year in February, January, February, and then the Cambodian New Year in April. Here we get assimilation. They're low, high assimilation, low ethnic identity. This is when students feel more comfortable in the target culture in our community here, the Marshall community, the American culture, versus their own heritage community. And then on the other corner, this is where we get segregation, where the students or the people feel more comfortable in their native culture and less comfortable, less successful, maybe even fearful of the target culture. Okay. So these are the areas of assimilation. And you would see many communities go through these different stages. In your opinion here, okay, of the immigrant population in Marshall, where do you think, in general, they are at?
What do you think about sports? Sports from other countries, they're a lot better soccer players, or
Yeah.
sometimes it's just interaction on
Yeah.
the football field.
Yeah, it could be in different situations too, right? So in terms of sports, that's a channel where they feel very integrated. They can navigate the mainstream system of playing for the high school and playing sports at the high school there, and then being successful in that. And that actually offers us a bridge of opportunities to everywhere else as well. So finding those areas of success can help move the immigration population forward and also the community as a whole. Okay? So in sports, they are very well integrated. But you picked up that example specifically because in other areas they may not be as integrated.
That's the first thing that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
We envy some of the immigrants who can do everything so well.
I'll admit it, I'm a pretty good soccer player myself. If you were to take it, let's do a show of hands here, okay? How many of you feel that the immigrant community here in Marshall are assimilated? meaning they're well versed in the American culture, successful in navigating our school system and everything like that here.
I feel they pretty much are.
Okay.
I mean, they have opportunities, they want them in music events.
Okay.
I think the Snow Queen was, I don't know if she's a refugee, but
Okay. Okay. How many of you feel, there's no right or wrong answer, this is just an opinion here. How many of you feel that they are on the other corner more segregated?
Are we talking to students, young?
The whole community as a general, and in general.
Oh,
well, that's different.
because I think the students are probably in a little different quadrant than the adults.
Yep.
and their parents are. So I'm wrestling with that.
Yeah. And as we go on in both discussions, I think one of the big things that I want us to take out of this is actually both matters and actually both matters at the same time. And I think the idea that I want you to be able to do is if you find success in certain areas, that is an opportunity to lead you to success in other areas also. Okay. So, okay, now let's go to the other side. How many of you feel that the immigrant population here in our community are very well integrated? Their stories are being valued, recognized, their foods are being shared.
I would say so.
Okay. Okay. That's good. That's the healthy place to be there. That's where we want.
Because when they had the memorial for the George Floyd thing out there at the university, London at the building, there's some people that drove through and picked up.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got that side, but you've got other ones that are putting up the memorial. So
Yeah.
It's,
Mm-hmm.
so I,
Yeah.
I don't know.
You know, and I would not be surprised. And actually, you know, being, you know, from southern Minnesota, Rochester, a bigger community, then also working in Faribault there, you know, people may be surprised about how well our rural communities in southern Minnesota here are doing with meeting the needs and adjusting their communities to create a even more prosperous community with the refugees and immigrants that have come in here. A lot of times when people think of diversity, they think of, you know, just the Twin City area. But actually the Twin City areas, you know, you can say that have some even more struggles than what we have here in rural Minnesota. How many of you feel like there's certain immigrant communities that are in this area here? They're lost. Struggling with both their own ethnic identity, their heritage, culture, and struggling to really be successful in the mainstream culture. And students, this is the area that we, and it's definitely in my field here of you know, Department of trying to provide interventions to meet students' needs. These are things that we watch out for, and there's signs that can show us how we need to change our instruction, provide different resources so that we can pull students out of this area here. I talked a little bit about this already, and these are just examples of things that could lead somebody. And this is when I was feeling lost. This is when I was in that red area, where I didn't feel like I fit in, you know, in the home culture or the school culture. You know, and here's some other models that discuss that here. And this is in a psychology work there. Just other names to identify the four corners that we were looking at there. Marginalization was the area that we would feel lost. And I use this more so when I talk about employment. When we hire people of diversity into our system, are we hiring only to meet the needs of people who are diverse themselves? Or are they treated as equal in terms of accessing all the necessities that needs to be done and the resources that are available for them to get the work done? For example, in the school district here, oftentimes we see as a way to meet the needs of many of our immigrant families is to hire people from the immigrant background themselves. That is true. We do need that representation. We need that support. But as we hire them, are we setting them up so that their job is to only work with that immigrant population, and every immigrant population that comes through our door, instead of meeting their needs, saying hello, finding what they want, there, we channel them to this person over here. That's that marginalized system that we don't want to create. This is in language acquisition research there. And again, what we want our students to do is to have that integrated language there where they're comfortable to be able to use their language in every area, and therefore they understand the code switching or the support that each of their home language can go. They have a healthy speech community for any of the language that they learn. So what happens if this gap continues to occur? If the signs where the students are in the red there aren't addressed, these are the things that happen. We get cultural dissonance. And sadly, this is what Faribault experienced for a very long time, and it's probably still working through it today because they didn't recognize the signs soon enough. We get a misrecognition of culture, so you get mistrust. The immigrant community, who are the minority in many situations, they create a resistance identity. Therefore, you get more segregation instead of that integration that we're looking for. And then, in certain situations, we may even get conflicts of resistance as well. And this is bad for the community. Very quickly here, I circle this person here. That's one of my uncles there. Now, he was picked on by both communities because he was smaller. He had a hard time in school. He really didn't grow up like he fit in. The stories on the side there is actually my story that I won't have time to go into today. This is what Rochester went through during the early Cambodian refugee resettlement. Many of our Asian students back then felt that they were being harassed and bullied. So what happened was, to be safe, they started hanging out more so together in larger groups at different areas. So then, white kids started doing the same thing and trying to really harass or attack or bully, hurt the immigrant students there. So after the Asian students hung around in groups for safety, there was another group, and this is how gangs start to form. Misrecognition of culture, resistance identity, leading into conflicts of resistance. So when that happened, the Cambodian kids started their own gangs. Now the headings, the newspaper headings are very different. The All-American Boys were not racist, not a gang. The Royal Cambodian Bloods were a very dangerous gang, and they were a part of everyday life in high school. I lived through that during that time. I would say it was very unfair. But what happened to me though, was because of that, there was really pressure for me as a very young kid, 10, 11 years old, to pick sides. This is now, that misrecognition, resistance identity, conflicts of resistance were forming. So all my friends in high school were other Cambodian people. Young people embracing this third culture because we did not fit in our home culture and our target culture. So we formed our own culture, and a lot of times we were too young to make the right decisions. So we made a lot of bad choices. I almost got killed walking home from school. I still carry the scars today. And I'm not going to say that I'm innocent in the whole thing. To address this, Mayo High School, which was a circular school, unintentionally had students enter separate entrances because the people who had money was able to buy parking permits. They were majority are white students. People who didn't have money, majority immigrants and refugees, parked on the streets and entered different entrances at school. All the intervention classes were on one side of the building. All the gifted and talented classes were on the other side of the building. So there was segregation within the schools. Everybody who had money had open campus. They left for lunch. Poor white kids ate in a separate room, another lunchroom. Immigrant kids ate in another lunchroom. This is what we don't want. This is my uncle again. This other picture here, that's my uncle too. One of the founders of the Royal Cambodian Blood Gangs. Now my uncle is on a roll here where he's currently awaiting deportation. He has to check in with immigration every month. There for crimes he committed as a teenager. And you know, something that we don't often talk about is that when you come as a refugee, you're not automatically protected against double jeopardy. So you serve your time for a crime that you commit very young, and then you still get deported on top of that as well. But he has a kid now. He didn't have that opportunity to readjust his life. I was fortunate to have my high school teacher who told me that even though I may be winning all these little battles right now, I will end up losing in the future if I don't make better decisions. She got me involved in school, involved with the new to country kids there, so I can really understand what my culture was like instead of like pretending like I have so much pride in my culture but I never knew anything about it. Because my mother couldn't tell me about it. It hurt her to tell me about it. So then we went on to do great things there, and our voices of wanting change became very productive. The one thing though that I have something against media. I felt like our stories didn't get told because despite our struggles throughout the whole time there, despite me almost getting killed, Rochester was considered the best place to live in the United States during that time. And what we can do to make sure that people didn't have my uncle's experience and to make sure people had my experience is do these things here. Honor the people's lived experiences. Find opportunities for them to share their story. Practice inclusion and empowerment. What can you do together? How can you create spaces for people to come together? Promote culture. We all have a heritage. You know, we all from different countries, Norway, Germany, you know, Southeast Asia, East Africa. How can we bring that to light so that we can celebrate each other? In Prior Lake, we do these 5 areas of work. Student voice, which bring in the student's perspective to our school district and connect their, bridge them to the things that we're teaching and make sure that they get input into the areas and the lessons that we provide. We have a lot of community and parent engagement as well. We have our regular parent-teacher organization, but to scaffold that parent engagement into the mainstream parent-teacher organization, we have parent advisory groups in our 5 top languages too, which is Russian, Spanish, Somali, Cambodian, and Vietnamese. And they would send representatives then to our PTO so that they can take turns so that we're not burning one person all the time to be that representative for that ethnic group or community. And a celebration of my story here, you saw about how we struggled back then. Well, now we are doing very successful. On top of the work I do in the schools, my wife's work that she does in the pharmacy world at Gillette Children, and I have a consulting business as well. Our family unit owns multiple business in the community. We own all the Jamba Juices in the Twin Cities. My father-in-law and his brother-in-law that started, he spent all his life savings because he knew that he couldn't go back to school and restart his life over by taking care of his family at the same time. So any little life savings he had, he invested it in a Subway business. And then now we own 4 here and started our own chain, franchise chain too, of the Waffle Bar and Treats. Their Waffle Bar is just putting ice cream on waffles, and it's delicious. Treats is just mixing ice cream with cereal. And ice cream, if anything, is good. So that's our business secret over there. You guys, you all are welcome to take it and run with it. Maybe there can be a waffle bar here in Marshall someday. But that is my presentation here. Thank you so much for your time. Yes.
So is your dad, are you still connected with him?
We are, yes. And I learned that I have 3 siblings over there too, 2 twin brothers, who one is a doctor, one is a nurse. there, and one younger sister as well, who's a pharmacist also. So our whole family can open up a clinic one day too. So any other questions? I can certainly take 5. Yes.
My heritage is from Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm wondering is that, was the European immigrant more involved with the way we do things here than the Asian? And is that, so did they
Yeah.
have about 5 steps up on the?
Great questions. I don't think so.
You don't?
I really don't. This is my opinion here, and then this comes from reading articles in the Faribault Historical Museum, where the Norwegians were just treated as bad by everybody. There was a German internment camp in Faribault during World War I and all that stuff there as well.
The Norwegians were?
Yeah, yeah. So what I think happens, and I struggle with this right now with my own son, is when do I tell him this story? When do I tell him about the killing fields? How should I? Because he's living a really good life, Why do I want to make him sad about something that's not directly, why do I need to make him sad? When do I tell him? After he wins a basketball game and then sit him down and say, you should feel very lucky, that you have all these privileges that I don't have when I was a child. I don't think I'm going to do it. And
do you think that it is necessary to?
That's what I'm grappling with right now. That is what I'm grappling with right now. And I think this is what our European ancestors went through in the past too. We struggle to tell our stories of struggles, so that gets lost. And we focus on our successes, because that makes us feel good, and it helps our children feel good.
And isn't that a good thing?
Yeah.
We should always dwell on everything that's bad in the past.
I struggle still. I think it is a good. Right now, I'm leaning towards not telling him.
Maybe if he asks.
But the sad part is, then the stories of my grandfather may get lost. So I don't know. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't have all the answers. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and inviting me out here.